Good, I see some nods. Great. So I'm just going to be introducing our speakers this evening. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of a couple of milestones in everybody's careers, just to give you an idea of where they've come from. But I'm going to let them do most of the speaking themselves. I don't want to spoil any of the good stuff. So first off, we have Dr. Anna Hicks, and Anna's joining us from Edinburgh. She's a volcanologist, a disaster risk reduction specialist, and a science communicator. So a woman with many skills. She is a BSc in Geology and Science Communication, an MSc in Science Media Production, and her PhD she describes as a mix between geology and social science. So I'll get her to tell you a bit more about that. It sounds really interesting. So after Anna's PhD, she carried out extensive postdoc work, research which took her to several countries around the world, including Indonesia, Iceland, Colombia, and the Caribbean. And she's now based at the British Geological Survey in Edinburgh. So Anna's going to tell us a lot more about her really rich and vibrant career. So Anna, if you want to share your screen.
Thanks, Jess. Okie dokes. Let's go for this. Right. Sorry, as you guys know, there always takes a little bit of time to get this going. Can you see my screen? Is that a yes or a no? Can anybody say it verbally?
Yes, all good.
And can you see the main screen or the any notes? Just the main screen.
Yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Right. Okay. Jess, thank you so much for that introduction. You kind of like done most of it for me, to be perfectly honest. So, well, just a very good evening to you all. I'm Anna. As Jess said, I'm based up in BGS Edinburgh. It's a pretty miserable night here tonight, but well, I say that it's not so bad for Edinburgh, but maybe not in comparison to the rest of the country. But we're doing all right up here. As far as BGS goes, up here we've got the second largest office of the BGS, with quite a diverse group of people that work across all manner of geoscience aspects. And even though today I'm going to talk a little bit about volcanic risk reduction, which is kind of my specialism, I hope that there'll be aspects that will be relevant to any area of geoscience that people here are interested in. I'll move on to a little less corporate slide for Creator to Community. So these are some images that document some of the highlights, I suppose, for me from my Creator to Community journey. And I'll be talking to you today about a couple of examples from I suppose my navigation through the world of geoscience and interaction with society. And so hopefully you can just you know, see those lovely photos that I've taken along the way around the world. And there'll be a few more of those along this journey. So I'll keep going. Now I'm going to just move you to a UK overview, but a little bit about my journey. So I left home from Cardiff a long time ago and headed to Royal Holloway University to undertake a BSc in Geology and Science Communication, realising that I kind of really love to do the SciComm stuff. Went to Imperial College to do a master's in Science Media Production, and actually kind of felt that my passion kind of lied in maybe joining BBC Media Action, somewhere like that. So after that, I went into the private sector and worked for a communications company for a number of years, developing my skills in media production and actually what constitutes good science communication, before then flip-flopping again and going back to try and, I did successfully complete a PhD. And I was really lucky with this one, actually, because This was before the doctoral training program started up. Not to say that they're a bad thing, but I got to develop my own PhD project, which was very interdisciplinary, looking across basically integrating physical and social sciences, along with dabbling with my science communication as well, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And then up to Edinburgh. So yeah, about 2015, I had a couple of postdocs in the meantime, but I've been working up in Edinburgh now for the last 5 years. But what am I? I know this is a really blurry picture, and I think it's because somebody was laughing so much when they took this photo, because I don't think nobody knows what I actually do. And many of you, I don't know, may suffer the same, but I still kind of don't know. What's my title? I suppose I've struggled with this. I'm a geologist, I'm a volcanologist, I'm a social scientist, a science communicator, an interdisciplinarian, a public engager, film director, and in many ways over the years, I've kind of felt like I've never been really good at something or become known for being an expert in X, Y, and Z. But recently I've become a little bit more chilled about it, and I think I know why, which I'll explain to you a little bit later. But let's go back to the first passion, why volcanoes? Many of you might say, oh, why not? I mean, they're amazing, they're fascinating. And for me, here are some of the textbook cases that shook and shocked the world and myself, and that are huge milestones for volcanology as a field of study, and we still build on the learning from these events today. But of course, there are also other draws to working in volcanic settings. Get summit views like this, not so bad. Get snaps like this, again, that was pretty scary, but it was lovely. Obviously the rocks. But then we start to get into more challenging spaces emotionally. And in some places such as this, there are more powerful, immersive reminders of how devastating eruptions can be. And even more so, these ones aren't my pictures. But, you know, these really do demonstrate the devastating impacts that eruptions can have, and that whether that's to lives, to livelihoods, things such as tourism, aviation, the economy, it's really, really complex. And this particular eruption of Nevada del Ruiz in 1985 really rattled me. It killed approximately 25,000 people, and I felt this level of loss of life shouldn't be happening. And I personally wanted to find out what I could contribute to reducing risk. So I'm going to give you a couple of slides now, just with a bit of data. So since 1985, in Nevada del Ruiz, Colombia, thankfully deaths are declining from volcanic eruptions, but losses are not. More livelihoods are being lost, and we all know why that's happening. But just as a quick view, we now know very clearly that social vulnerability is important, and we now know so much more so in COVID-19 situations that actually the more vulnerable members of our society are being affected by this. So just very briefly looking at the blue people here that are outside the exclusion zone and the yellow that are inside the exclusion zone. If we take those yellow people and then we put them, we look at actually why they were there. The majority of them were there because of their livelihoods. So that might have been farming, for example. And so we know that social vulnerability is a really important thing to study. And this really struck me early on in my career. So I wanted to just show very briefly on this that whilst the volcano is very important to study, of course, actually also is this the downslope impacts, the dynamics of the infrastructure, the lives and livelihoods, property, resources. And of course, that's built into politics and the economic infrastructure as well. It's really, really complex to understand what's going on here in addition to what's going on with the volcano. So back in my PhD, I tried to ask, could an interdisciplinary approach help? And yes, I think the answer to that is. So lots of pictures here from my interactions with the landscape and with the local population of Tristan da Cunha, the most remote population in the world. And then we move on to the kind of my latter work, because I realized, being interested in rocks is fantastic. Being interested in people is also great, but the latter is more challenging. And seriously, working together with local communities to reduce risk is really hard, because societies are really complex, and often people that are at risk, we see communities at risk from a volcanic eruption, or many volcanoes actually in Colombia. But they're also at risk in a multi-hazard environment. So they have other concerns, such as income, getting food on the table, or access to healthcare. Sometimes the volcano isn't even on their agenda. So trying to understand people's lives, often in very different cultures to your own, find out their stories, their concerns, isn't easy, and it can be a distressing experience for lots of people. And I've been in situations where I've revisited people to find out that their levels of poverty have risen, or their vulnerability to hazards has increased over the years. So it's challenging as well to try to balance your own emotions of handling often really difficult situations, with issues of power balance as a woman, positionality as a researcher, as well as, of course, of how you're perceived by others. So I just very briefly wanted to highlight, like, these images are terrible, from the eruption of Nevada del Ruiz in Colombia, but one very strong message came out of my research, working with local communities, was that people wanted to remember, but they didn't want to see these. They didn't want to see these messages. They wanted stories from their community, and pretty much that's kind of what the crux of my talk is about the importance of storytelling. So here I'm from my PhD, storytelling, right up with a really a small camera in the top left here, to then graduating that to working with experienced professional film crews later on. But the point was to actually share the stories of local communities with them, so that the communities could actually see and hear from people that they understood, that they were relevant to them. So you can actually access any of these films on the Strava site. Strava often comes up as Strava for those cyclists amongst you, but Strava is Strengthening Resilience in Volcanic Areas. It's a long-lived project, and it has some really rich resources, which I'd really recommend you go and have a look at on the YouTube channel. And whilst I'm talking about stories, I think it's really important that it's not just verbal stories. that we can find data in other ways. People share their memories, their perceptions, and their emotions in different ways, and that might be poetry, it might be dance, it might be drawing, and certainly from the volcano perspective, the perceptions of volcano or indeed landscapes in general are shaped by personal, social, and cultural values, and of course their historical roots. So by exploring these varied perceptions of hazard and risk, it's really interesting, but perhaps more important is going further to understand the societal processes that drive risk dynamics, which ultimately create or prevent disasters. So I have recently been using arts as both methods and social vehicles, which brings me actually to the last slide. Some final thoughts on interdisciplinarity and a kind of like, so for me, I'm now okay with being an interdisciplinarian. I thought I was a jack of all trades and master of none, and now I realize that actually my skills can lend themselves to really important, challenging, global challenges that are going on right now that actually need these sorts of skills across, whether it's geosciences, social sciences, engineering, whatever it might be. And I think certainly from my perspective, there seems to be an increasing amount of opportunities to engage, whether you're you're a single disciplinarian that wants to look outwards, or whether you just want to lend your skills as a geologist, that's fine too. But there's increasing opportunities to lend skills. So yes, that's kind of where I want to end. I realize I'm on 15 minutes, so I'm gonna stop. But I would really welcome any questions on that.
Thanks so much, Anna. That was fantastic.
And let me just try and yeah.
Great. I love the message you're ending on, that we can all do a bit of everything. I just recently changed career after my PhD as well, so I'm definitely in a similar boat, and I hope that it's a strength that we can take lots of different skills from our PhDs and apply them to other areas. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I might kick off with a few myself. I'm really interested as to how you think being exposed to the communities that you were researching, how that social side influenced the research you did, or did it even have any impact on the science you were doing? Did you look at the science differently?
That's a really good question. And I think it's really subtle, to be honest, Jess. For me anyway, in some cases, that it seemed to enrich the science. So that I would be, for example, in the field, getting some samples, some rock samples with my field guide, and he'd be asking, well, why are you getting this particular, you know, what are you looking for? And then, you know, you can find this at another place and X, Y, and Z. And then he'd be like, oh, but we actually use this for building material or something like that. And so, and then you'd find out a little bit more about how they use that building material and how that had been part of their, you know, their culture for that particular rock for however many years. Just those kind of gentle conversations can actually lead to something quite special and enriching for both elements, I think.
Yeah, it's so interesting, so interesting. I think a lot of the time as geologists we can have our heads stuck in an outcrop, and it's really interesting to consider a wider context of the ground that we're walking on, the places people live. I'm wondering, did you have any sort of training going into these communities to deal with, as you said, what can be sometimes quite distressing situations?
So in terms of the difficult situations, no. In terms of social science, yes, I had master's level training, and the university that I was in at the time were very, very, very stringent on ethics training, which thankfully now are kind of pretty much blanket across the board. That still doesn't stop, unfortunately, from you encountering really challenging situations. For example, I was in a community in St. Vincent, quite a poor community, and a woman came up to me with a babe in arms and said, you know, could I give her some money to buy a bottle of milk? And ethically, according to our, you know, we're not allowed to do that. And I had to make some really challenging decisions. And you know, you're interacting with people, as I said in my talk, that are the last thing they want to talk about is the geology or the hazard, or, you know. And I think you kind of learn on the job, to be honest. It's not easy. But
No.
I think having good social skills and also a good team around you is important.
I guess that must be such a difficult situation, but I guess you must have to keep in mind then that hopefully the research you're doing can help people like that in the future, and that's the importance of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would you have any advice for someone interested in incorporating a more social aspect into their research project? This question comes from Marta and our team there.
Oh, yeah, lots. If I can speak frankly, I think certainly from in my experience, there's been a little bit of kind of cherry picking of methods from other disciplines to fill a hole, perhaps, in a to try and answer a scientific question, and, you know, or whether it's the social aspect or something else. And I really push back against that, but please just collaborate with people that have those skills, that knowledge of the context, the knowledge of the methods. And it's, you know, it's not just about asking a few questions and that's social science. It's kind of really bad, actually, to it's not nice for social science scholars, of course. So, you know, I think it's kind of collaborating with people that are interested in your science as much as you're interested in their science, and you'll go far.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great advice. I think we'll move on to our next speaker, but if there's any more questions for Anna, please pop them in and we can come back at the end. I think there's a kind of common theme, even though all our speakers are extremely varied. Everybody does have a very interdisciplinary approach. So I think this is going to make for an interesting discussion at the end. So thanks so much, Anna. So our next speaker is Dr. Anjan